Okay, and just before we get started, I'm just going to test audio really quickly. Caron, are you on the webinar? It looks to me like you maybe. Oops.
I am, and I just was able to unmute myself. So can you hear me?
Perfect, yeah, and I will be muting you from my end, so you don't need to do that. And with that, Marnie, I think we're going to go ahead and get started, so I'll turn it over to you, Marnie.
Terrific. Well, welcome everyone to our fifth of 6 webinars. NAPTA and CFTE have partnered on this series of webinars to help advocates across the country to be better prepared to be successful at the ballot box. My name is Marnie Primmer. I'm the chair of the National Alliance of Public Transit Advocates, or NAPTA. And today's topic is data, polling, and campaign intelligence. And this may be our 5th webinar, but I'll say for myself, I think this is the foundation of a successful campaign. Having good data and good polling information before you go in to your campaign, and strong campaign intelligence throughout the process is a really important component of an overall successful campaign. I'm based in Southern California, and I've been involved with several successful measures as well as a couple that have not passed, and have been a transit advocate for nearly a decade now. So I'm very excited to hear from our great panel of experts today about data, polling, and campaign intelligence. Today our speakers are Patrick Ruffini with Echelon Insights, Ian Stewart with EMC Research, and Caron Whitaker with League of American Bicyclists. And we'll be starting today with Patrick. Patrick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure everybody can see my screen okay, and hopefully that works. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you all today. And I just wanted to kick things off, just talk a little bit about how we see this challenge and how we see the polling universe changing. Every 6 months or so, it seems like there is a huge, there's a huge controversy in the industry, with an election that gets missed, or some huge perceived failure in polling. And so when we kind of started out, myself and my partner Kristen Soltis-Anderson, a couple of years ago, we were really kind of about how do we unite all of these different, we know that research is changing. We know that the way that you conduct research both in a campaign setting and a non-campaign setting is changing. Landlines are increasingly going away. More people are on cell phones. It's getting more and more expensive to conduct good, high-quality research. What can we do to bring together both innovations in the digital world, in the online polling space, as well as the newer world of predictive analytics and modeling, where we're able to draw upon not just survey data, but other data sources, whether it's historic election results, demographic data, consumer data, and integrate that to build a stronger model of who is likely to support or oppose or be persuadable on any issues. And we've done this work now on behalf of, already, even though we're a 2-year-old firm, we've done it on behalf of presidential primary campaigns, party committees, and ballot measures and other advocacy efforts. So one of the things I think we just want to emphasize, from the get-go, is the fact that that research and opinion research is no longer one-size-fits-all, and there isn't really a single gold standard anymore. Where in the past you could contact 800 voters on landline telephones, and you could get a pretty good, accurate, representative sample of Americans. Increasingly, people are segmenting in terms of not just their experiences in terms of how they consume media, but how you can contact them whether that is online, whether that is through telephone polling, and increasingly voters, particularly who are cell phone only and are only able to be reached in that way. But the way we kind of see it is as a toolbox, that you don't use telephone polling exclusively, you don't use online polling exclusively, you don't use predictive analytics and modeling exclusively. You use each of those things for the specific task that you need and the specific job you need done. And in a campaign, you need lots of different jobs done, and you need them done in different, we would argue in a distinct sequence. So kind of to take away, it's really kind of take how do we normally view the challenge going into a campaign, particularly a campaign where voters may not be, it is not maybe a candidate campaign where voters are engaged from the very get-go on the issue, that they need to be educated a little bit more on the issue. We need to talk through the issue a little bit more. And we find in general that the best way to start research on those efforts is through qualitative research, through focus groups, through talking directly to voters. Those findings then inform what we're able to do with survey research and with polling, both on where you may stand in the horse race, but also how do people think about your issue, and how do people think about the arguments that are made on both sides of the issue. And finally, something I think we have been big proponents and evangelists for is not stopping there, not stopping just purely at the measurement phase where we're giving you a book of results and some crosstabs, but we're also able to use some of that data, expand upon that work to build targeting models of likely voters and people who are likely to both support public transportation or be persuaded by certain arguments around public transportation, as well as are they likely potentially to turn out and vote on an issue like this. Weaponizing that research into actionable targeting models that you can then use across various platforms, like digital targeting, like direct mail, and increasingly on TV as well, is really an increasing, really a part of what we do in integrating all of these different sources of data in a campaign. And again, we like to start out not necessarily on the big data side of things. We like to start out with just talking to voters. We like to just really have a conversation about what is the issue at hand. We think that this is a good first step in a public education effort. We're really hearing how voters are talking about the issue in their own words. How are they responding to different messaging we're putting in front of them, and doing it in a way that you don't fully control. And we are big proponents and believers, and sometimes we get pushback on this idea, but we should fairly present and those findings not only are helpful in their own right, but they do inform the questions we later ask when we go to the survey research, when we go to the choices that are presented to them. But I think as we go through this process, it's important to clear up a few misconceptions. That it's very important poll should tell you with accuracy who's winning. It should give you a statistically valid sample of the electorate. To tell you how to win, which arguments are going to make it easier for you to win, and having a more in-depth study up front really helps you do that. Also helping you understand what are the demographic and geographic drivers of support at a pretty high level. And I would say that at a high level that begins the process, but that doesn't end the process, because I think that there are newer and even newer ways to actually get a much firmer handle on that when we'll talk a little bit more about the analytics side of it. Finally, I mean, I think having shorter follow-up surveys continuously throughout the campaign, gauging progress and adjusting strategy accordingly. And as I mentioned, there are also new ways to assess where you stand. In particular, in the past, you would have maybe you have your benchmark survey, and then you'd have one or two kind of brush fire surveys in the field. And now the opportunity to be in the field more regularly and more consistently is growing, in part because we now have online research, that you have a number of different online panel companies that are emerging. You have platforms like Google Consumer Surveys where you ask very quick questions, and we've used this pretty extensively and have found the results actually to be pretty accurate in terms of being representative we would expect to see and what we see from more traditional research. So one of the main benefits, I think, of a lot of research moving online is, number one, I think it's cost effective. The turnaround can be pretty quick. And it's more versatile than phone surveys in terms of being able to ask questions that you can't necessarily, and complex and more involved messaging questions than you might not be able to ask as well on the phone. The downsides is, in particular, if you're dealing with a very local, in a very local environment, that it can be difficult to collect enough samples, so it may not work in every other case. What it does enable you to do is a few different things around testing video, testing actual messaging content, and showing it to more people than just the 12 people in a room during a focus group, but actually being able to pair messages side by side from opposing sides and show which would result in the greatest increase or decrease in support. Also doing this, this is a text-based version of this that we have put in place for a number of different clients, where we're really asking maybe 400 to 600 people to rate statements, to rate and to ask to say whether they agree or disagree with a certain message, and let them strike through things they don't like, let them highlight things they like, and really you can kind of see it's that old focus group dial test, but done using text. So there's really a lot of really innovative things you can do, oftentimes with online research. And oftentimes we get caught up in these questions of, are they as representative, are they as reliable as traditional surveys? And we think the answer to that question is yes, but that is not the only reason that you might use these techniques. That they do offer ways to get better data than you might get on the phone. The third step is to weaponize, we think, that research, and doing it in a way that's integrated with your traditional research. The process of predictive analytics. Now, oftentimes I kind of find myself explaining this one a little bit more in depth, because I think, frankly, people are very used to and very comfortable with traditional survey work, traditional focus group. But operationally, what this means is you're still conducting a survey, but it may be a survey with a larger sample size, but with a shorter questionnaire. The shorter questionnaire kind of gets determined by which questions actually tend to be the most productive and fruitful in terms of determining the things that we actually want to get at, like support. So we may ask a support question. We may ask one or two issue questions. But this is not really doing kind of the bulk of the message development work. It is just a short survey to ask a lot of people, you know, do they in particular support a particular measure or not. And we are then relying upon over 600 different variables from a voter file, as well as neighborhood or community level data, such as demographics, past election results, and in your case, it's transportation use. One of the, you know, one of the things we have found in understanding these issues is that really kind of the demographic breaks that you might see in a traditional survey, in crosstabs on a survey, don't always apply, because it really is about access to these services, how you know, how close are and how reliant are they upon the various parts of the transportation system. So that has been a hugely determinant factor, and that's something that through voter data, through kind of geographic data, you can find on a very granular level and map down to the precinct level support for a given initiative. Ultimately, what we are determining through these studies is through these predictive analytics projects is a 0 to 1 score for each person. Are they likely to support, or likely to oppose, or likely to turn out, or not likely to turn out, or likely to be persuaded on a certain aspect of the argument? And then mapping that, both allowing you to target those individuals to build efficient targeting universes that you can go out and find people who are more likely to be supportive, but also at the same time not as likely to turn out. So that would make up a turnout universe. And as well as here the people who you know, who are a little bit more on the fence, but are definitely going to vote, and you need to persuade them to get out and vote. These kind of shorter surveys can also be used just to get a quick read on how opinion is changing. Are things going your way? And I think oftentimes people are asking, you know, these large sample size surveys, are they expensive? Are they more expensive than a traditional survey? The answer is not really, because you're compensating on the questionnaire length as opposed to, you know, as opposed to just, you know, kind of the traditional research approach. Kind of tend to think of the life cycle as one where you're integrating different data sources on the front end. So when we're talking about voter data, it's not just the survey data that you might get on the front end to develop your messages and the broad demographic insights that you were used to getting, but you're really incorporating data from the voter file, and data from a voter file is data that you can get from by buying it from a Secretary of State or buying it from a local election official, and which can oftentimes, it can range from very cheap to very expensive, or getting it from a provider, a commercial data provider, which has enhanced the data with a lot of the variables that you may be interested in, including some of them around transportation. Historic election data is very important, and to the extent that there have been votes on these issues in the past, those are likely to be predictive of what will happen in the future. And also, any kind of data that you may have on a geographic level that you can append into the voter file that is specific on patterns of transportation use, transportation hubs, proximity to certain locations that are key to transportation infrastructure. What we then do with all of that data, combining all of that data, the ability to build individual level models of support, turnout, and persuasion, that can then not just be used to garner aggregate insights about the population, about the voting, about the electorate, but can actually be used to target and reach those voters with relevant messages, whether that's through mail, TV, or digital. And thank you very much, and I look forward to the other panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrick. We appreciate your presentation. Before I turn it over to Ian, I just want to quickly remind everybody that to ask questions, please go ahead and type into the little chat box in your toolbar. We will be answering questions at the end, but please feel free to type those in anytime during the presentation. And with that, Ian, let me pass it over to you.
All right. All good?
I see your desktop.
You see my first slide?
I don't. I just see your desktop.
Okay, hold on. Because it was on the wrong screen. How about now?
There you go. Perfect.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Stewart. I'm principal with EMC Research. We are a public opinion research firm. I am in Seattle today, but we have offices throughout the country. I'm going to be focusing on a specific research project for sound transit, and I think that will help you understand how what we just discussed gets put into action. So we do a variety of services for a variety of clients. We range anywhere from public and private, corporate, nonprofit sectors, doing all types of research. So whatever we think the right tool is for the project is what we employ. Our office is now here in Seattle, Oakland, Columbus, Florida, Dallas, Portland, and Washington, D.C. The project I'm going to focus on today, we've been working with Sound Transit since 1999 on a variety of research projects. In the past, focus groups have been done. There's been a market share study. But what we really want to focus on is the work that Sound Transit has put in to go to the ballot. This is going to be the third time the agency has gone to the ballot coming up this November. We've got other projects that I'm not going to speak about today that deal with transit. So a lot of what I'm going to speak to today has something to do with those projects, but this one specifically I think does the best job of describing how we get to the point of getting to the ballot and what we deal with when we're talking about research and a measure that might raise taxes whether locally or statewide. So the road to this specific measure, I think, starts in the 1990s when Sound Transit was initially created and then voted on. The first vote in Puget Sound was voted down. There's a long history in Puget Sound of transit agency requests. If you look back in your history, there's a lot of it there. But Sound Transit came back with a second measure. That's the first time we started working with anyone related to the agency or the project. And since then, there was another measure in 2008, and now another measure on the ballot in 2016. The most recent effort to the ballot came about when Sound Transit needed to go back to the legislature, Washington State Legislature, to ask for more authority. The Sound Transit 1 and 2 measures that were passed used up essentially all the authority the legislature gave them. So the first challenge, which has been a challenge for the last 5 or 6 years, the agency has been discussing, how do we get more authority? How do we convince Olympia and legislators in a body that's not necessarily in Seattle to support this thing when there's definitely other push-pulls happening at the legislative level and throughout the state. So over the course of this now 17-year relationship, we've worked with a team at Sound Transit at various times that have included public relations people, have included technical people who are running figures on what the projections for the long-term ballot prognosis looks like, how much money do they need. We work with people in planning to try to figure out where services are going. So it's been a wide variety of staff members throughout the agency who've been exposed to a whole bunch of different kinds of parts of the agency and what they work on. To get to Sound Transit 3 in November 2016, the first thing we needed to do was get authorization. Then we had to do some research to figure out what's the potential range of what we're talking about, which is also influenced by the political discussion. One thing we cannot forget is that the elected officials that manage Sound Transit also have an interest in what happens to the ballot, and so do the voters and citizens in the region. Then we go back and take a look and verify, are we actually on the right track here with something that's viable, something that people are wanting? Then for Sound Transit, as with many transit agencies, there's an element of public involvement, because they need to actually go out and tell the public about what they're planning to do, what they're planning to put forward on the ballot, and gather public input to refine things. And finally put it on the ballot, which actually happened just a few weeks ago, that the agency placed this measure on the ballot for the November election. So showing you some actual polling data that we first started using to try to make the case, and this is essentially, when I say make the case, we're talking about Sound Transit and other advocates in Olympia and around Olympia and Puget Sound trying to make the case for why more taxing authority makes sense. One of the questions we asked going back to 2008, you can see at the top there, would you support or oppose continued expansion of Sound Transit's mass transit system of light rail, commuter rail, and express buses? You'll note a couple things. There's no tax question in there, right? It's this general support. But we also have this number going back to 2008. And the reason that's important is that in February of 2008, this was prior to the 2008 measure when President Obama was elected, that was also on the ballot at the same time. So you look at the support levels throughout, and this is voters in the Sound Transit District in Puget Sound, there's, million-plus voters in that region. The support has been consistently strong in the 80s, regardless of whether the first measure was passed, which it was, and was on the ballot, on the ground and starting to do construction in 2008. The second measure then passed in 2008. You can see that the appetite still continues in June of 14 and December of 14 when we went down to the legislature to talk about this. So clearly overwhelming interest in this, which is helpful for the legislature to say, I see that voters in this region want this. The next thing we asked on the same survey was, we explained that in order to expand this, the legislature had to give authority for Sound Transit to continue. Do you think the legislature should give that authority or not? You'll notice that that number drops a little bit. But even when it's in the 70s, legislators and other supporters, other people who are having this discussion in Puget Sound start to recognize there's a strong proportion, in 2/3 plus, of voters who think legislature should do this. Now, this is only one of the many factors that went into the discussion of how do we get to this? There's a lot of horse trading that happened that I was not a part of. There's a whole other webinar on what happened to get ST3 and Sound Transit part of the transportation package. We can just sort of write that off for the moment and presume that it happened. If you're interested, we can have a longer discussion about it. But what happened then in June, July, in a special session, the state legislature approved this statewide transportation package, which included, among other things, the authority for Sound Transit to go back to the ballot with a 0.5 cents sales tax, 0.5% sales tax increase, a 25% per $1,000 of property tax, and then a 0.8% motor vehicle excise tax. So those three taxes alone give Sound Transit a lot of authority to use to go back to voters to say we want to construct more of the system. That was step one. So once they got that, and they used our polling to help inform both the voting public and the legislature about why that should be, then the agency started to tackle the questions of, okay, now that we have these resources, what do we think we're going to ask the voters to approve? There were four major things that were in that discussion, and the spine was which is what they called it here, which is light rail building from Tacoma all the way down to Everett. This was sort of a promise that was made a long time ago. You think about how a legislative body works with all these regions at stake. You have to have enough in each of these regions to say, yep, I can see how that's going to help us and our voters and help the region move. Then the second element of this was the city. Because Seattle is such a big nexus of population, you have to show that the voters and the residents in Seattle that two major locations, West Seattle and Ballard, two major population centers that people can see drawing, were part of the plan for light rail. And so far I've talked almost exclusively about light rail to the rest of the components in a minute. Then there's the east side component. When we say the east side, that's our suburban regions. That there's a lot of cross traffic now, both going west and east to go to work centers and things like that. So have to make sure there's something in there for them. And then finally, what about everything else in between? There's commuter rail, there's express buses, and things like that. So all this discussion starts happening at the Sound Transit board level. And as we start assisting with that, then we have to start reconciling the question that when people vote on this, the vast majority of voters will likely never ride this system. Or if they do, they're not going to ride it every day for work. The Puget Sound is such, and mass transit systems are such, that your population centers, unless you're in a place like New York, are just not carrying as many people. And especially at this stage, voters are really judging this on the question of what does the future look like, even if I get other people out of my way. Does this help me, and does this help our region? So that's a key component to think about when you're putting together these transit packages. It's not about the transit riders. It's really about the people who aren't riding but are going to vote on this and decide its fate. So that brings me to the campaign portion of this. Once this got to the approval stage, a campaign started discussing this. I can't really go into much details here because they haven't released any of this information yet, but I can tell you a little bit about it. At this point, the campaign went in to say, what is viable? And by viable, I'm talking about the ballot measure itself. They used a mock ballot title to say, if we tested this with all those three taxes in there that are going to have to appear on the ballot, what are our chances of passing? What happens when we hit this thing? And when I say, I mean it in a negative sense. With opponents come in and say, it's too expensive, it takes too long, it's not going to the right places, it's not doing the right thing. Can we survive that? Can we make it to the ballot and win? And so all those things happened for the campaign. I wish I could talk about it at the moment. In about 8 to 9 months, I'll be able to, and then we'll have a much different kind of webinar. But that stuff has happened. It will continue to happen throughout the fall as we move into the November campaign season. And that polling generally looks different than what we do for the agency. The agency work is much more testing what voters want to see as part of this and what they want to learn about as the entity starts to put forward what the package looks like. So as our discussion's happening, then we actually did some work for the agency to try to refine what their package looked like. If they spent everything in those 3 taxing sources and raised them all at once, you're talking about approximately $54 billion for the agency, and that will get them a series of things. But part of this discussion is, are we giving people the things they really want? Are we having the right mix of elements in the package that they say, yes, that's going to do something for me, those voters that I talked about earlier who probably will never ride, or at least don't see themselves riding? Can they see themselves this being a benefit to them? Could they see, well, maybe I'll use it occasionally? So we tested some options, and we did this in a phone survey with both landlines and cell phones in the Puget Sound region. And we're trying to project to a all-voter population. We're testing various ideas. I'm really summarizing them here, but each of these 4 had a series of 4 to 5 questions to try to play with these ideas of, if we dropped a tax and we then had less projects in the same amount of time, what does that look like? What if some things came online faster, like if we put some express buses on the ground right away and extended some other things further out? What if we had funding for everything, but it was a longer period, so maybe it was a 50-year build period? What does that look like? What if we cut out everything but one tax? Do we change things? We obviously will cut projects, but what effect does that have? So after we did all these things and tested these projects, we started to get a much better sense of what this package should look like and what voters thought this should look like. And if you go to the end result here, in April of 2016, we did a very similar kind of project, but this was just on the final proposal that Sound Transit had developed after looking at these things. And what you see here is the actual polling results from that we presented to the Sound Transit Board. We did an initial test of what we think the ballot measure would look like. Then we described sort of what the services and projects might look like. Then we talked about the cost, those 3 taxes, and we said, what's the average household cost or an individual cost? What is the effect of that? And then when you know what the timeline looks like, when you're talking about Sound Transit building light rail, in this region, we're talking about, a 20-ish year time frame, all the way up to, 25 or 30 years, depending on which project you're talking about. How does that timeline affect support? If you notice on this, the timeline actually had the biggest drag on support, because that's a long time. If you think about it, if you're voting on this now, even me, when I think about it, this is going to be something that's coming online in my lifetime, but it's not something that's coming online tomorrow. So that timeline definitely has an impact on what things look like. And all of these components help Sound Transit try to figure out what should this look like, what's the best foot forward that we can put that voters want to see. So the end result of that is just a little bit ago, June 23rd, Sound Transit has now referred a measure to the ballot. It is the full $54 billion. As we started to look at this more, what voters said was, we're essentially, and this is partly from a focus group research, but also from these telephone surveys, the region is far enough behind that people feel like, I want to do as much as I can. I want to get as far as I can. I want a system that is as good as I can make it. So there's a few features in here that Sound Transit tweaked as they approached this final package. 100% grade separation is one of them. Projects at least 3 years faster, in some instances maybe 10 or 15 years faster, depending on what they were going to do. A total of 62 miles of light rail in this package, which will add up to, with the Sound Transit 2 package, about 116 miles of light rail total. There's a suburban bus rapid transit line that's going to run up the east side corridor at a very rapid sort of interval. And there's also an expansion of Sounder commuter trains. So we sort of tested this a bunch of different ways and a bunch of different times. I wish I had more time to go into more details today. But the end result here is that when you use these kinds of research, the agency can then go back and look, or any entity, whether it's a campaign entity or transit agency, can go back and both tell a story about what are we trying to do for the region and help engage people in that discussion to get you to a better place, and at the same time say what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact and are the most attractive to people. And I think I will leave it at that. And if there's other questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ian. Just one more reminder that if you have questions as these presentations are going on, to type them into the question box on your toolbar. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Caron Whitaker.
Okay. So should be able to see my screen.
And if you just put it into, yep, there you go. Awesome.
There you go. Okay. So my name is Caron Whitaker. I'm with the League of American Bicyclists, and I'm going to talk about a micro-targeting project that we did with Advocates for Transit 2 years ago and is now available to all of you to use. So just to give you a little background, at the League of American Bicyclists, our mission is to build a bicycle-friendly America for everyone, and we do that through certifying communities, universities and businesses as being bike-friendly. We also do a lot of education, and then we do a lot of policy advocacy. And we work with about 200 state and local bike groups on that, or biking and walking groups sometimes. So when I'm talking about micro-targeting, I'm talking about the same thing that Patrick talked about with predictive analytics. In a consumer perspective, you always hear the story of, you know, the woman who started getting coupons for diapers before she knew she was pregnant, but because of all of the data that companies knew about her, they figured it out first. So micro-targeting is sort of doing the same thing, how likely you are to vote for something or not, based on both your political history, your party, as well as your demographics, your entertainment, and consumer habits, and where you live. So we went into this project. We did it jointly, as I said, with Americans for Transit. They were very interested in looking at who is the transit voter, who is the transit rider, and then who has a transit rider in their household. So those were the things they were looking at. And like, how does someone who vote for transit, are they the same, or what are the characteristics of them that might be different from that of a transit rider? You know, from the League's perspective, we wanted to know who's a bike voter, and are they the same or different from people who bike. And so from the bike perspective, we built 3 models. We built who's a recreational bicyclist, who's a transportation bicyclist, such as a commuter, and then who would vote to increase their taxes to build more bike infrastructure. On the transit side, again, they looked at who's a transit rider, who's a member of a household that also has a transit rider, and then who is likely to vote to increase their taxes for new transit facilities. And then together, we wanted to answer the questions about, is the bike audience different than the transit audience? Because we've been seeing a lot more initiatives that fund both transit and biking and walking, or fund a variety of projects, and we wanted to see if that would make the initiative stronger, and then talk about how could we use that data to be more effective at sort of get out the vote, at persuasion, and as a method for testing and targeting messaging. So what we did, we worked with Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner Research. They pulled over 10,000 voters. They then, this is similar to what Patrick talked about. When they talked to voters, they knew who they were, so they were able to look at their voter records to identify common characteristics and build an algorithm for support for bike funding or for transit funding. And then they applied that algorithm to the 190 million voter records that are in Catalyst. And I'll talk about Catalyst further on. And then, you know, they assigned a score for them of 0 to 100 on how likely they were. So for the bike voter, like 100% means they're extremely likely to vote to increase their taxes for new bike infrastructure. 0 means they're extremely unlikely. And then the same for transit funding. So this is different from other polling, and like the polling that Ian was talking about, where in this particular poll is a poll we did years ago, where you want to group people together, like to convince decision makers to fund something, we want to use the biggest number possible. So here we ask the question of, do you support increased funding for sidewalks and bikeways? And we said, you know, strongly support increase, somewhat support increase, maintains, somewhat decrease, very decrease. And so we combined the high support, the moderate support, and the just maintain to get that 83% number. In doing this micro-targeting, we were really trying to pull people apart. We wanted to get very narrowed down on that. Would you increase your taxes to pay for transit infrastructure, to pay for bike infrastructure in your community? So these are not polling results that we're going to publicize, but it's data that can be used in a campaign. So I'm just going to give a broad brush of results quickly. Some of the things we found is that bike voters, there is some overlap with transit users, but they also bring in new people. The other thing we found out for bike voters was that they're more correlated with their political affiliation than the likelihood that they actually bike themselves. That was really interesting to us. It was less about their own habits and more about their political view of what they want their community to be like or to do. So this is a map looking at the average bike score, bike voter score by zip code. So the higher the green, the higher the likelihood to vote in favor to increase their own taxes for bike infrastructure. So you can see the New England, the Amtrak corridor, the West Coast. We did really well in Michigan and Southern Texas, which was really interesting for us. Here's a quick view of the same thing for transit. Now the blue is a little bit funny, but the darker the blue, the more support. And again, remember, this is the average for an entire zip code. So again, you see sort of the Amtrak corridor, the West Coast. A quick view of them together so you can sort of see where their support differs a little bit. Here's one example from Oregon of how it looks like this. And I just want to remind you, this is, again, polling that we were really trying to narrow down. This is the entire state of Oregon, and it's before any campaign or persuasion has happened. So the red line is where 50% is. The other thing I'd point out in the shapes is the reason that the transit support is more sort of jagged is that this is more robust data. People have been asked this question about transit before, and so they have, so it's a little bit more regular. When you look at the bike support, and also you can see it's half the scale. What we found, a lot of people hadn't been asked, and a lot of people were sort of in the middle of, I don't know, you know, maybe, I guess. So that was sort of interesting to us. And the more you use the data, the more you can put those results in and make it more robust. And so if you can, once you have this data, it gets added into a voter file. So you can know from the voters their basic information, their score on biking, on the likelihood to vote for bike infrastructure, same with transit infrastructure, and you can compare that to their likelihood to vote in general, to show up at the polls. And they have different likelihoods on voting, whether it's a presidential year, a midterm year, an off year. And also the demographics, the party data, and all of that. And one of the interesting things for us in the building of the algorithm or the characteristics is we have a joke that a recreational bicyclist is a white guy over 50. And so we were like, is this what this is going to tell us? But actually the results were really different. This is just one algorithm that came out of this, that if you're female, if 6 2/3 of the people in your census block work in an electronics or appliance store, and if you score higher than 0.36 on a TV broadcast, then you're more likely to be a bike commuter. So this is the kind of data we would never have figured out ourselves. So that was really interesting. I'm going to run through this idea of how to use it very quickly, but in 2014, so we're assuming a ballot measure. I'm using a universe of 500 people. Let's say you want to get out and reach 180. If you're looking at those 500 people, this is looking at their support for bike funding on the y-axis, their likelihood to vote on the x-axis. These top people, these are going to be your volunteers. They're very likely to go out to vote. They're very likely to support biking. Those are the people who probably want to get involved in your campaign. You probably don't have to reach out to them too much in terms of getting them to the poll or persuading them. When you're looking at persuasion, you can say, okay, these are the names and addresses of people that are always get out to vote and are sort of likely to vote with us, but we're not sure. And so those are sort of your persuasion folks. When you get to the get out the vote, these are people that have a high score for increasing their taxes for bike infrastructure, but not a high score on their likelihood to vote. And so those would be your get out to vote targets. So this is something, actually I'm going to go 2 up, sorry, that can help sort of focus your resources on who you want to reach out to. You can separate out who you need to really persuade about your issue. These are the people that are going to vote. These are the people you really need to figure out a message for and really hit them on that. And then who are your get out, who are the people that they're probably with you in spirit, but they need some, a reminder and a push to really get out to vote. So this allows you to, folks, and also again to figure out what kind of message do you want for what group. So those are some of the benefits. I'll just go back to that last slide. And this is looking at support to increase taxes for bike funding versus support to increase their taxes on transit. And so if you look at that, if you're going over here, these are people with a higher support for biking, lower for transit. You might choose who your volunteers are who go out to those people. You might change your message for those people versus people that have a high degree for both, or for people that are not so likely to support taxes for bike infrastructure, but are likely to support it for transit. And then this group, you're probably just going to hope that they stay home. So then the question comes on how do you get the data? I talked about Catalyst before. This data is kept in the Catalyst vote records. They own the records. We own the bike data. Americans for Transit own the transit data, but Catalyst owns the voting records. You can either get a subscription to that, or if you are a member of your state VAN, the Voter Action Network, they generally have subscriptions. So we worked with a Seattle group, I think maybe it was 2014, it might have been 2015, and they used this. They were already a member of their state VAN, so they already had access to the voter records. Once you have access to the voter records, if you're interested in the transit data, Greg Leroy, who's one of the board members of Americans for Transit, you can contact him. Here's his email. He can sort of flip the switch on the transit data. If you're interested, if you're working with a bike group, I'm the contact there. And yeah, so that's it. And thanks. And I'll turn it back to you all.
Great, thanks, Karen. And I'll turn it over to you, Marnie.
Terrific. So 3 great speakers, 3 really interesting perspectives. We do have one question, and I just want to remind everyone that if you'd like to ask a question over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a place where you can type your question in. We'll be taking questions from that location, so go ahead and get those questions ready to go. I think the takeaway for me is, you know, you have sinners, you have saints, and you have the unconverted, and you really want to focus your resources on those folks who are unconverted, who might support you but haven't been given the reasons to do so yet. We had a question from Lauren. In Ian's presentation, is he recommending 4 different surveys be done throughout on the initial after services / projects, after costs, and then after the timeline? Ian, do you want to clarify that a little bit?
To be clear, those weren't 4 different surveys. That was one survey that tackled all 4 of those items. So what I was showing you was a progression of support during one specific survey. And so I think that's what the question is about. Those weren't separate surveys, although I can tell you that there have been, in this cycle, 2 to 3 different surveys that Sound Transit has conducted on this. But each of them dealt with a different item. So that the one that I showed you that was the double check slide that had all 4 of those, that was one survey. And then there was a different survey we did where we tested the elements of should it be 1 tax, 3 taxes, longer timeline. That was actually done in the same survey via 4 samples within the survey itself. So that might sound a little confusing, but that's what we did.
Okay. So the next question is, will the slide presentation be posted somewhere for viewing later? And the answer is yes, CFTE will post this webinar on the CFTE website. So you can access the information after, which is great because there's a lot of good nuggets in here for you to take back to your own organizations. A question I have for our panelists is, what's the biggest surprise that has come for you out of a polling or data collection situation where you really thought one thing going in and then the information started coming in and you had an aha moment? Have you had that experience before, or has it really been something where you thought a situation was one way and the polling has always shown that that's the case for you?
I'm not sure who should go first here, but I'll take a stab at it. This is Ian. From my experience, I think the aha moments are more likely to happen in a focus group because when people get in the room and talk to each other, they say things that you hadn't thought of. By the time we get to a poll, it's not so much about the aha moments as trying to piece together the puzzle of what story we're either trying to tell or where the voters are going when they weigh things. So I think those are less ahas than, okay, now we know the answer. Those focus groups, I had plenty of times when we did a focus group, you were not expecting someone to say that, and you go, okay, that really clarifies or muddies everything we were thinking about from here on in.
Yeah, so this is Caron. I would actually echo what Ian said in having done some work with confidential interviews with decision makers or those focus groups where something that you thought worked when you're so deep into something, to hear people respond that it doesn't reach them has been interesting. From this work, what was interesting to me from that predictive analytics or the micro-targeting was those factors that to me are unrelated to biking that were what affected whether or not someone was likely to support it.
I would also add, in terms of maybe not something that's an aha moment, but something that I think that might clear up a misconception people have about, particularly on the micro-targeting side, is that you often hear a lot about all the consumer data we have, or all the, and all the individual level 600 variables that, we may use. And it's very rare that we actually end up using 600. I mean, it actually, because maybe a dozen or 2 dozen of those variables end up being significant. But among the things that turn out to be even the most significant, it's not simply what someone individually, characteristics of a voter as an individual, but it's what does the overall community, what characteristics do they tend to share in common. Oftentimes those, what we might call environmental variables are just as big of a factor as whether somebody is individually riding a bike or, having a, you're more likely to be, to be probably supportive on that issue if not only do you ride a bike, but a lot of other people also in your community also ride bikes. So when you combine those two, you often find that's where the strongest support arises, and it's in the combination of those two things rather than any one specific variable.
Great. Thank you all very much for answering some questions. We have one more question, and it's regarding help for organizations that need to work with a professional in the data and polling side of things. Is there a resource that CFTE has, or does anyone have any recommendations for campaign planning and consulting for firms that have been successful in the transit and active transportation world? Any thoughts that anybody wants to share?
I would just jump in from CFTE's perspective. If you, we're happy to work with you. If you want to email us at info@cfte.org, we can definitely chat with you about what you're looking for. I don't know if any of the other panelists have some insight on that as well, but feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, this is Ian. I do have one piece. If you think about your region, there's enough of us professionals doing this throughout the country, and obviously we're all going to argue that we're the best at it. But what I would say to you is that someone in your region has been through something similar, whether it's a transit issue, or it's a police and fire issue, or it's a fill in the blank, right? There's probably someone who's good that has covered your region or represents your region or does work in your region that you should be connected with, and talk to one or two of those firms, get some background on them, and you'll probably be pointing in the right direction if you use your own internal resources to find those, in addition to the CFTE.
So this is a really important component to a successful campaign, and it does take some funds to be able to engage in these types of data collection and polling activities. I just want to make a pitch for NAPTA. We have local coalition grant funding that we do annually. This round of funding has closed already, but I hope to get it on your radar screen for future opportunities. We typically do it every spring. Sometimes we do it twice a year, have a spring and a fall cycle. But we have funds available to help advocacy organizations and groups that are looking to support transit and transportation ballots make it to the measure, or measures make it to the ballot. So I would just encourage you to keep that on your radar screen and look for other funding sources for your group to be able to engage in this important activity, because making assumptions about what voters think is not the most effective way to have a winning campaign. Having the data to back it up is really a critical component to your ultimate success. I don't see any more questions, so I want to thank our presenters today. I want to thank CFTE for their partnership. The next and final stop on our 6 Stops to Success is Tuesday, September 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Innovations in Digital Advocacy and Messaging. I know you won't want to miss that. The 5 stops that we've had so far have been just tremendously informative, and I have no doubt that stop number 6 is going to be terrific. So if you want to sign up for that, the registration is on the final slide there, and I thank you all for your participation today.